What we have here is the V-neck with button band that has been completed up to the center back neck. So both of these sets of double knitting stitches are on hold live. And what needs to happen now is that they need to be finished in some way and joined to complete the neckband. So you have two choices of how to do that. You can use a modified 3-needle bind off, which I will demonstrate, which will create a visible line of stitching here, but it's actually quite pleasing and a lovely detail. So if you prefer to work that way, that's one option. The other option would be to graft these stitches. And because essentially what you have here in double knitting is a tube, this fabric is actually hollow. It is not attached. So the only reason this is in a linear setup here is because all of the stitches are in line with each other on the needle. If we took these off, they would actually open up into a tube. So what I'm going to do is separate the stitches out into knits and purls and create that tube and then graft essentially in the round. And the way that I probably like to do that is to move from one garment edge this way around the band and then back the other direction again towards the edge. That way my tails end up at the edge where I'm going to need them in order to neaten things up. But essentially, this is just like any other grafting or Kitchener stitch situation. You want to preferably separate out the knits and purls and work with them separately so that you can orient them properly. So let's try that. We're going to begin by separating out what looks like knits and purls in this piece of double knitting so that we can prepare for grafting. Remember that this is really just stockinette on both sides, which means that if you're looking at the stitch, it looks like a knit. If you're looking at the other side of the stitch, it looks like a purl. So that's what we're going to be using as our visual guide. I'm going to use double pointed needles here because that's going to give me access to either end of the stitches, which may prove useful, as you'll see. So I'm going to take 2 needles together and pick up one edge of my band here. And I'm going to slip what looks like purls to one needle and what looks like knits to the other needle. So this has a bump in front, it reads as a purl. This is smooth in front, it reads as a knit. So they are the opposite. So I'm going to go purl to one needle, knit to the other, purl bump to one needle, knit to the other. And that's it. It's really creating a front and back orientation. And what you see now is once they're separated out, you do actually have this circular tube structure. You see that the double knitting is essentially just a tube. Okay, now we're going to do that for the other side. And I'm going to separate knits and purls onto 2 separate needles. So I take this purl stitch and I scoop it. And I take this knit stitch and I scoop it. And remember, you are entering the stitch purlwise and slipping it purlwise so that you don't insert any twist or change the orientation of the stitch. So scoop the purl to one needle, scoop the knit to another needle. And that's really all there is to it. You're just dividing out those stitches. And then once again, I have access to the tube, and I will be able to do my grafting from garment edge towards the band edge and back again. And what I'm going to do is be grafting these sets of stitches, the ones that look like knits, together, and then turn the work and graft the second set of stitches that look like knits together. Okay, next step. We've now separated the 2 halves of the band onto sets of double-pointed needles. And what we need to do is graft this edge together and then this edge together. So for most people, the easiest way to do that is going to be to work this way on the top edge towards the garment, and then flip the work and work this way towards the garment. We work towards the garment just so that there's a convenient place to hide the tails. If you, for some reason, prefer to work the other way, it's perfectly fine. So there will always be many tempting tails that look like you should sew with them. I'm going to suggest that you don't. It's just almost never a success. Something will happen. You might need that tail for something else. You'll run out of yarn. It's best to cut a separate thread. And typically you need about 4 times the length that you're going to graft, which is tiny here, plus some tail on either end. So I'm just going to measure that out. A little bit of tail. This is my length. 2, 3, 4. Really, that's more than I need. You don't want to have less though, and you don't want to run out. So I'm going to break my yarn here, thread my needle, and I'm using the double thread because obviously that's what I used in the garment, and in order to match, that is what I will need. So you have the instructions for grafting in the pattern. What I'm going to talk, and they work. If you follow them, they absolutely work. What I'm going to explain as I go here is how I think about it to help guide myself. First thing we want to do is secure the needles that we don't need right now, which is these bottom 2. I'm just going to stick those down in the knitting so that they're sort of out of commission, and these are a little easier to access. So get those out of the way. Okay, so once again, what we're looking at here is a row of knits and what looks like a row of purls. And the way that I think about this is sames and opposites. Every time you'll have the instructions for your grafting. Just one thing that's helpful to remember is that you're going to enter and exit every stitch twice. You will go through it twice. The first time you go through it, you will go opposite to its orientation. When you exit it, you will go the same as its orientation. So if this is a knit stitch, the first time I enter it, it will be purlwise. The last time I exit it, it will be knitwise. I just find that helpful when I lose track of what's going on. It's a good way to keep track. Okay. So you have the way that you start your setup for your Kitchener or your grafting, and you're going to go, as I said, in the opposite direction of the first stitch on the needle. So that's purlwise because this is a knit. And opposite of the back stitch, which looks like a purl, which is a knit. And now we're ready to start our grafting proper. You're going to go back into that first stitch on the front needle. And remember, this is the second time we're going through it, so it's going to be knitwise. And it comes off. And I'm going to go into the next stitch for the first time, which means I go in purlwise. I'm going to go into this back purl for the second time, so I'm going to go in the same way that it is oriented, purlwise, and I will go into the neighbor stitch for the first time, opposite to how it is oriented, knitwise. And yes, there's a lot going on here. I'm dropping some stitches. If I wasn't doing this for a demonstration, I would probably put these back stitches on a circular while I was doing that. feel free. But once you get those first couple of stitches going, they really settles down. So it's the same thing back and forth, right? Back to the front, second pass is the same knitwise, first pass is the opposite, purlwise. Second entry is the same, purlwise, first entry is the opposite, knitwise. Knitwise off, purlwise on, purlwise off, knitwise on. And after you've done a few, you can start to see that your stitches are forming and you can start tugging on things. I would say don't pull too hard initially, but do check it as you work to make sure you're mimicking the tension. Back to the front, knitwise off, purlwise on, back to the back, purlwise off, knitwise on. Same off, opposite on, same off, opposite on. So set yourself a time when you have some quiet, some room to breathe, some room to think, because it's a bit of a fiddle, let's not deny it, but it's worth it in the end. Now we're getting to the end here, and because it's not strictly speaking, it's not like other grafts, right? We're moving into a finished edge here. So let me show you what happens. We're gonna keep in pattern. Now we have, whoops, those last two stitches remaining. And let me take these guys out of the way. So you're near the edge of the sweater here. And that's what you're going to solve with your tails. You're not going to solve that all now. So you're just going to end this the way you normally would for a graft. So you're going to come into the last stitch on the front needle knitwise and the last stitch on the back needle purlwise. And yes, there will be some looseness that will have to be attended to by some tugging and tails. Let me get these out of the way so I can show you. Whoops, I'm losing my friends here. Okay. So what do you end up with? You will have this little bit of a gap. That's what we need our tails for. And you can see, you know, initial tension, not too bad. Just needs a little bit of adjustment there. And most of that will be done at the very end, but I just want to show this is why we keep some ends around. And this is why we work in halves so that we have some leeway here. So this will get straightened out at the very end, but you can definitely give it an initial pulling here. Okay, so we've done the top. And now we need to turn to the other side. Okay, we're about to start the second side of grafting. If you care to, you can leave a very long tail initially and use that tail to do the second side, which will give you a lovely continuity here. If it's too difficult to handle a thread that long, or it's perfectly fine to start a new thread here, which is what I'm going to do. You can always use your tails to fix in the end. So this time we're doing the same thing. We're looking at the same orientation, knits and purls. We're going to proceed in the exact same fashion from edge towards garment. We begin the front in its opposite orientation to the back, its opposite orientation, which means going knitwise through a purl. And then we proceed as before. Knitwise off, purlwise on. Purlwise off, knitwise on. Knitwise off, purlwise on, purlwise off, knitwise on. And just checking on the tension there, not too bad. And just slowly, gently, yes, there's lots of bits of thread to get caught on, there's bits of needles. And of course, if you're filming, your threads will behave abominably. Everyone knows this. But slow and steady. And if you'd like to practice this on a little piece of band, it's another great reason to have a little swatch. Everything is easier the second time. Okay, back at my last stitches. They'll be a bit wonky because they're loose. Knitwise off, purlwise off. And remember, lots of tails to pull on here. That's going to help us. Okay, and yes, it's a bit uneven at the moment, but that is why we leave plenty of slack and we can just tug on things to tighten them up. It's easier to tighten than it is to loosen, so that's why I don't pull too hard initially. Pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, and then what we're going to do is just use our tails to weave in here at both edges and smooth things out. And any irregularities you see now should disappear in blocking anyway. Good to get it as neat as you can beforehand, but that's the magic of blocking. It's going to cover all of this up. And actually, it's particularly uneven in this case because one side has already been blocked of this band. So the threads are just, they look different. But again, just take your time. You do it to your satisfaction. No one is really going to inspect the back of your neck band. But you'll know it's there. There we go. I'll probably keep tugging on it intermittently. That's my style. But like I said, don't overdo it because when you wet it or steam it, it should plump anyway. So you don't want it too tight. Pretty good. Okay, and the next step would be weaving in these ends. But there you have it, a completed stockinette, double-faced knit band.